Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland. Welcome back to the channel. This video is about the current situation regarding President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Well, it's not going very well for him. I remember thinking months ago that Pokrovsk is going to fall to the Russians, and it still hasn't fallen. Thinking back to the Kursk incursion, so it took Russia 8 months to repel the Ukrainians. And then, okay, they finally pushed them out, but the Ukrainians have just penetrated somewhere else in Belgorod region. I know they've taken over only a very small slice of it, far less they had in Kursk. Nevertheless, some of Russia's sovereign soil is controlled by enemy troops, and that hadn't happened since 1944, when they finally drove the Wehrmacht out. So what a humiliation. Putin, the strong man, he's not strong. To make Russia secure, he's made it insecure. Nobody talked about that. Nobody tried to do that for 80 years until he invaded Ukraine. His limousine went boom right in the heart of Moscow. Who managed to blow it up? A major security breach. This is a country which is absolutely fixated with security. You've never seen so many police officers in your life as you have in the center of Moscow. And those are the uniformed ones, and the ununiformed ones. Anyway, there's the FSB, their internal security agency. They got the Rosgvardia and whatever. He's got his Federal Protective Service. So even one of his cars was not safe, blown up right outside the FSB headquarters. So a major breach of security. When they're absolutely paranoid about security, they can't even keep that secure. And it's not like a false flag operation when like he murdered a former deputy prime minister or something. So some days they're not going forward at all. Occasionally, they're even driven back by the Ukrainians, and there are days when Russia moves forward 100 meters. Even they're not bragging about taking hamlets these days, but they are taking major casualties. So they offer huge financial incentives for people to volunteer for the Russian army, so like $20,000. It would take a working class man to earn several years to earn that amount of money in the Russian regions. But of course, people are realizing why they're paying that much, because people aren't going forward. The chance of being killed or wounded is high. 54% of those wounded are amputees, and often they're not being given prosthetic limbs. They're just treated appallingly. It's like the Afghan war veterans of the 1980s. Some of them, were paralyzed from the waist down, had both legs amputated, and they weren't given wheelchairs just to crawl around. That's communism for you. Oh, so compassionate, caring about the poor. No, they didn't. Well, the elite lived in luxury. So it really is disgraceful. So Putin, he really wanted to avoid that big draft he introduced in September 2022, when the war had gone on much longer than he thought, that it wasn't the cakewalk he'd predicted. So this is far from a victory parade. And when the Ukrainians captured one of those Russian army trucks early in the war, they found it full of dress uniforms, because the Russians thought they'd be just marching into Kiev and could hold the victory parade there. My God, were they wrong about that one. So their two annual call ups, and the spring one is now. So he's ordered 160,000 men to be drafted, which is much more than usual, and they've got to be called up by the 15th of July. Remember, men under 18 are eligible for this obligatory military service, and the conscripts are not sent into the combats. They're told, ha ha ha, lie. Putin, in his initial broadcasting announcing the so-called Specjalnaya Voyannaya Operaciju, said, and I assure you, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, wives, girlfriends of the conscripts, they will not be sent to fight in Ukraine. Lie. They were sent, some of them the very first day. Not many. I think Putin actually meant it, but there was incompetence, there was disorganization, there was just some lack of troops, and some commanders just sent them anyway, thinking it wouldn't be found out. But it wasn't a significant scale, and other well, they definitely have. And then when Putin was driven back, when the Ukrainians took some of Kursk in August, they did capture quite a few conscript as well, because they're wet behind the ears. They don't really know what they're doing. So they're having to call up more people because the casualties are so high. There's over 900,000 casualties, and the conscription age used to only be up to 27. Now it's up to 30. So you're going to do your year of basic training and then be discharged, unless of course you volunteer to serve longer. And then some people who've done their 1 year compulsory service will be called back to it later in their 20s, 30s, 40s in the last few years to plug the gaps. They're meant to have some sort of refresher course of a few weeks. Often it was just a few days, because they're out of date. Military doctrine has moved on, technology has moved on. They don't know how it's done now. Have to adapt to an era of drones and things like that. So because they're taking major casualties, they're having to draft more men. Now, admittedly, some of the draftees could be used to guard other frontiers, and then the more experienced troops be brought in. Um, but I was thinking about that. They've got roughly 30 men of a military age. Sorry, 30 million men of military age. Now, up to 1 million of those have left the country, and now some of those have got exemptions because they're physically disabled, because the police, the security services, some vital roles in the economy. They're the fathers of 3 or more minor children, blah blah blah. So giving a maximum pool of about 25 million. Now, bear in mind that they've got severe labour shortages already. The more of those you're drafting, the more people, the harder it is to fill various gaps in the economy. Why they're particularly trying to recruit people to work from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. People from Central Asia are reluctant to go because there's so much vicious overt racism against them, especially the Crocus City Hall attacks, all these really impossible to comply with regulations about having to register here and there, and this, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you can get a massive fine, you can be arrested, you can be deported for anything. And of course, they're coerced into joining the Russian army, which is a crime back at their home countries. So lots of problems for him. Now, Trump has let it be known that he is deeply displeased with Putin. So we know that Trump's got this weather vane mind, and he could swing the other way, provide more weapons to Ukraine, ramp up the sanctions. Of course, the next day he could change his mind. So there's really no telling what he's going to do. But it's not looking good for Putin, because Putin has strung him along for 2 months, thinking he's gaining a military advantage, thinking Ukraine's about to collapse. And Putin did gain a small military advantage. And when arms shipments and intelligence sharing were shut off, that was good news for Russia. But it seems that Trump's turning the taps back on. The Europeans have hugely ramped up their spending, so they are able to give more to Ukraine. So Putin's strategy has not been as successful as he thought, and he played Trump for a fool a bit too much, and was adding all these conditions. I'd like a ceasefire, except, and trying to get too many concessions. And the Trump was willing to agree to quite a lot of them, but he's annoyed Trump, and he's pushed his patience too far. So that's a difficulty. Obviously, there's severe economic headwinds these days, with rising inflation, as well as the fact they don't have enough workers, with the interest rates very high, and looking like a lot of businesses are going to go bankrupt this year. Although in a way that's a good thing for Putin, because there are more unemployed people, more people to draft and things like that. And his visit to Kursk region, where they recently drove out the Ukrainians, seems to have been a double of his. Because Putin never goes anywhere near danger. He's actually extremely cowardly. He would never do that kind of thing. Someone who did look quite like him, they found the best lookalike they could in Russia, plus a bit of surgery. And it seems to be very extensive coaching to speak like him, not just the voice, the sort of thing he'd say, to carry himself a bit differently, look like a man who was a little bit broader than him, the eyes a little bit thinner, the nose, his nose is more dipped, the jowls are a bit saggier, so they haven't quite managed him. But if you want to believe it's Putin, if everything around him make you believe it's Putin, then you would fall for that. But so Putin's got at least one body double. Right. Thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate in PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Goodbye.